I still remember the rain that night, the way it blurred the city lights as I stood trembling on the bridge, clutching my heart like it might fall apart. Loving him had felt like destiny. Until the world turned its back on me, and shame replaced the warmth of his touch. Welcome to the Untold Love, where real hearts speak their truths. If this story touches you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. My story begins in a way I never expected, on a night that felt ordinary but would forever change the course of my life. I wasn't looking for love. In fact, at that time, I had convinced myself that love was something distant, something that happened to other people in movies, or in those perfectly curated stories we scroll past online. My life was steady, maybe even predictable, and I thought I was content with that. But then, I met Landon. It happened at a friend's art exhibit in the city. The room was glowing with soft lights and quiet chatter, and I remember feeling a little out of place, holding a glass of wine I didn't even want. And then, across the room, I caught him looking at me. It wasn't the kind of glance that fades in a second. It lingered, steady, almost curious. There was something about the way his eyes held mine that made me feel like he saw me, not just the way I looked that night, but all the parts of me I usually kept hidden. When he finally walked over, I felt a strange calm rush through me. He asked me something so simple, about the painting we were both standing near, but the way he listened when I spoke made me feel like my words carried weight. His voice had this warmth that drew me in instantly. We talked about music, about how silence can sometimes feel louder than words, about dreams we'd never admitted to anyone else. I don't even know how long we stood there, lost in that bubble, but I remember leaving that night with a feeling I couldn't quite name. The days after were filled with an excitement I hadn't felt in years. Landon started calling me in the evenings, his voice spilling into my quiet apartment like a familiar melody. We'd laugh about small things, share stories about our childhood, and sometimes sit in comfortable silence that felt more intimate than words. With every conversation, I felt the walls I had built around myself begin to soften. It was intoxicating, the way he made me feel like I wasn't just another face in the crowd, but someone worth seeing, worth knowing. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe in something extraordinary. Falling for Landon didn't happen all at once, it unfolded slowly, like sunlight spilling over a dark horizon. After that first night, our connection grew in quiet, steady ways. He started texting me good morning, not with overused lines, but with small, thoughtful words, a song recommendation, a photo of a sunrise he'd pulled over to admire. Every message felt like a secret only we shared, proof that someone out there was thinking of me even when the world was rushing past. Our first proper date was nothing extravagant. He invited me for coffee on a Saturday, and we ended up talking for hours at a small cafe tucked between two bookstores. I remember how his laughter came easily, how his eyes crinkled when I surprised him with my dry humor. There was no rush to impress, no performance. With Landon, I could simply be, and somehow that was enough. Weeks turned into months, and our lives began to intertwine. We wandered through weekend markets, stopping at stalls to taste fresh bread and homemade jam. He would slip his hand into mine as though it belonged there, his fingers fitting around mine with an ease I hadn't known could exist. Sometimes, we would sit in the park near my apartment, watching the world move as if we were standing still in the middle of it. What struck me most was how deeply he seemed to notice the little things. When I was nervous before a big meeting, he sent a voice note telling me I had everything it took, and more. When I offhandedly mentioned I missed my grandmother's old recipe, he found the ingredients and showed up at my door, ready to try cooking it with me. Those gestures were never grand or loud, but they carried a sincerity that reached places inside me I didn't even know were waiting to be seen. I began to look at the future differently. For the first time, I could imagine someone standing beside me through the quiet and the chaos, through the years ahead. There was a softness to that thought, a sense of safety I'd never associated with romance before. Loving Landon felt like learning a new language, one written in kindness and laughter, and for a while, I believed we were writing the most beautiful story I had ever known. For a long time, everything with Landon felt effortless, as though the universe itself had stitched us together. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the air between us began to change. It started with little things I could almost convince myself I imagined, his texts arriving later in the day, the pauses in our calls that weren't there before. When I'd ask if something was wrong, he'd smile and tell me he was just tired from work, and I wanted to believe him. Still, I couldn't ignore the unease curling inside me. At dinners with friends, I'd catch him glancing at his phone, slipping it back into his pocket with a speed that left my stomach tight. Sometimes, while we walked along the river at dusk, his gaze would drift somewhere far away, as if I wasn't standing right next to him. I tried to laugh it off, to remind myself of all the sweetness he'd shown me, but doubt has a way of whispering louder than reason. The first time I felt truly unsettled was at a small gathering Miles hosted. Landon spent most of the night talking with people I didn't know, his back half turned toward me as if I were an afterthought. When he finally came over, his words felt distracted, his smile faint. I told myself it didn't matter, that I shouldn't read too much into one evening, but a fragile part of me started to splinter. As the weeks passed, the distance grew. Calls ended quicker. Messages felt thinner, stripped of the warmth that had once drawn me in. I told myself he was stressed, maybe overwhelmed, but in quiet moments I wondered if I'd done something wrong. Had I cared too much? Expected too much? One night, unable to sleep, I scrolled through old texts, rereading the lines where he'd once promised to show me every hidden corner of the city, where he'd written that I made the world feel lighter. Tears blurred the words until they became unreadable. I realized how terrified I was of losing what we'd built, how much of myself I'd placed in the space between us. It was then I understood, something fragile was shifting, and no matter how tightly I tried to hold on, I couldn't stop the cracks from spreading. The night everything unraveled is etched into me like a scar I can't quite forget. It was meant to be simple, a birthday party for a friend of Miles, held in a warm, bustling loft downtown. I almost didn't go, weighed down by the quiet tension that had settled between Landon and me. But he insisted we should get out and have fun. Part of me hoped it might shake away the unease that had been clinging to us. At first, the room felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in weeks, music humming, laughter spilling out in waves, strings of lights hanging low over polished wood floors. Landon greeted people with a charm that seemed effortless, while I hovered nearby, trying to catch a glimpse of the man who once looked at me as if I were the only one in the room. After a while, I wandered toward the kitchen to refill my drink. That's when I heard it, his voice, low but sharp, carrying words I wasn't meant to hear. He was leaning against the counter with a small circle of people, his smile easy, almost careless. And then, clear as glass, he said, "It wasn't that serious. She just got attached." There was laughter, quiet at first, then louder, like someone had just told a good joke. My heart stopped. I froze where I stood, my breath lodged somewhere in my throat. Every word seemed to echo inside me, too loud, too heavy. I don't know how long I stood there before the weight of it forced me to move. I slipped outside, the air cool against my face, but it didn't wash away the sting. Shame pressed against my ribs until it felt hard to breathe. I replayed his tone, the way he dismissed everything we'd built as if it were nothing, as if I were nothing. A part of me wanted to go back in, to demand an explanation, to tell him he couldn't speak about me like that. But another part, the tired, trembling part, knew there was nothing he could say to erase what I'd heard. Standing alone beneath the city lights, I realized the truth. The love I thought we shared had been turned into a story he could shrug off. And the person I trusted most had just humiliated me in front of a room full of strangers. The hours after that night blurred together, as if someone had drained the color from the world. I remember walking home through streets slick with rain, hearing my own footsteps echo and wondering how I had arrived at this version of myself, one carrying a hurt so heavy it bent my shoulders. I slipped inside my apartment, shut the door, and let silence swallow me whole. In the days that followed, I moved through life as if I were made of glass. At work, I smiled at people and answered emails, but my thoughts were elsewhere, replaying every syllable of what Landon had said. I searched for cracks in my memory, anything to suggest I had misunderstood, but the words were clear, his laughter as sharp as broken stone. Nights were the hardest. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, asking questions that had no answers. Had I loved too openly? Trusted too easily? One evening, when the loneliness felt unbearable, I received a message from an unexpected name, Sloane, Landon's sister. She wrote that she'd seen how kind I had been to her brother, how deeply I'd cared. She confessed that Landon often sabotaged things when they got too close, convinced people would leave if he didn't leave first. Her words didn't excuse him, but they offered a glimpse into a fear he never shared. Reading her message, I felt a mix of sorrow and clarity. I couldn't mend what Landon had broken, not for him, and not for the version of myself that had waited for someone to treat her gently. But I could decide what came next. I started writing in a journal every morning, pouring every ache onto paper until the weight inside me began to loosen. Miles invited me for walks, and we wandered aimlessly through the park, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing side by side. Little by little, I began to breathe again, to notice the smell of rain on pavement, the way sunlight stretched across my kitchen table. The wound was still there, but it no longer defined me. Beneath the hurt, I felt a quiet strength stirring, reminding me that my worth had never lived in Landon's hands, it had been mine all along. Healing wasn't a straight path. It was more like learning to walk again on uneven ground. Some mornings, I woke with a sense of calm, as though the storm had finally passed. Other days, a single memory of Landon's smile could pull me backward, reminding me of everything I thought we were. But slowly, I began to see that moving forward didn't mean erasing the past, it meant reclaiming the parts of myself I had lost inside it. I started small. I lit candles in the evenings and let soft music fill my apartment. I spent hours at the library, losing myself in stories about people who had survived their own heartbreaks. Miles became a steady presence, inviting me out for long walks or lazy Sunday breakfasts. He never asked me to rush, never tried to fix me. He simply reminded me, in quiet ways, that I was still whole, even with all my cracks. With every journal entry, every shared cup of coffee, I began to understand something essential: my love had not been the shameful thing that night tried to make me believe. The humiliation wasn't in loving. It was in how someone chose to treat a gift they didn't deserve. I started to honor the strength it took to offer my heart so openly, even if it hadn't been received with care. There were moments when I caught my reflection in a window or mirror and almost didn't recognize the person staring back. She stood taller, softer somehow, but steadier. She wasn't defined by Landon's words or the laughter that had cut her so deeply. She was defined by the way she had gathered herself, piece by piece, and built something beautiful from the wreckage. One quiet evening, I sat on my balcony as the sun sank behind the buildings, painting the sky in gold and rose. A breeze brushed against my skin, and for the first time, I felt entirely present. I didn't know where life would take me or who might one day walk beside me. But I knew I would meet them as someone who understood her worth. Someone who no longer measured her value by how gently another person held her heart. I found myself one evening standing once more on the bridge where my story had quietly begun. The city shimmered below, bathed in the fading light of a setting sun, and for a moment it felt as though the world was holding its breath just for me. I rested my hands on the cool railing, feeling the breeze sweep across my face, and realized how different I was from the person who had once stood here trembling, waiting for someone else to choose her. The months since that painful night had been a quiet revolution inside me. I had learned that heartbreak doesn't erase who you are. It reveals you. It strips away illusions until you're left with the raw truth of yourself, the strength you didn't know you had, the resilience you never thought you'd need. I had come to understand that loving someone, even imperfectly, is not a weakness. What matters is how you return to yourself when the story ends differently than you dreamed. I thought about Landon, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of gentle distance. I could see now that his choices had come from a place of fear, a place I could not heal for him. That wasn't my burden to carry. What I carried instead was the quiet pride of having offered love with an open heart, of having survived the sting of betrayal and chosen to stay tender anyway. Looking out across the water, I felt a steady calm settle over me. There would be other chapters, other people, other unexpected joys waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. But none of them would define me. They would simply walk alongside the person I had fought to become. I took a slow breath, letting the air fill my lungs, and whispered a promise to myself: never again would I shrink to fit inside someone else's hesitation. My heart deserved a love that would stand unashamed, and until that love arrived, I would stand for myself. As the last light melted into night, I turned from the bridge and walked forward, my steps sure and unhurried. For the first time in a long time, the future felt wide open, waiting, patient, and full of possibility.